Welcome back to the 90s Rewind. That was Violent Man from Marion. And I'm talking to Paul Laird this evening about his new book, The Birth and Impact of Britpop, Misshapes, Scenesters, and Insatiable Ones. Those insatiable ones, of course, we're referring to as Suede, and Misshapes is a pulp reference. But Scenesters is something that I've got to say, it passed me by. Do you want to explain, Paul?
Yeah, so Scenesters is a track from the Flamingos, brothers James and Jude Cook, who are now both very accomplished published authors of fiction and non-fiction books. And the Flamingos were a big band for me during Britpop. We're going to come back to them later on with my final song choice. But yeah, their album, Plastic Jewels, was so important for me. I loved the way they looked. I loved the way they sounded. They understood the importance of having good trousers. They were very similar to Manta Ray in lots of ways. They were another band that kind of flew under the radar in terms of what the mainstream culture got from Britpop. But they were drawing on all sorts of influences. Great writers. I think if you go back and listen to the Flamingos, you can hear that these were two guys that were writing before they were songwriting. The quality of the writing is great. So yeah, it's a Flamingos track.
And they were instrumental in getting you to write the book in the first place.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I interviewed James and Jude on my podcast when that was a going concern. Excuse me. And we did a couple of interviews. I interviewed James about his book Memory Songs, which is about the music that kind of shaped the 90s. And if people haven't read that, I can strongly recommend it. It's a really great read. So we had a long conversation about that. And then I interviewed James and Jude together about the process of writing and creative writing, because I had in my head this idea of writing a novel. And at that point, we began to share messages privately, and there was a bit of discussion about certain things. And yeah, they really helped guide and steer the ship, as did Louise Wenner. Louise encouraged me to go and do a creative writing course, which I did with an organization called Write Here, which is a wonderful creative writing course. Not the thousands of pounds that you have to pay with some creative writing courses, and it gives you a great insight into how to write, how to pitch to publishers. So if anybody's thinking about writing, Write Here would be my top recommendation.
And now you mentioned Louise from Sleeper, and I had the absolute pleasure of being able to see them live for the first time just a few weeks ago. They came to Manchester, touring the It Girl album. This is something and I'm going to ask you about this, because it's something that's always fascinated me, is that Britpop really saw an explosion of female-fronted bands, whether we're talking about Sleeper or Echo Belly, Kaniki, Elastica, Lush spring to mind, Republica were around. Why do you think that there was that kind of movement that was happening around that time?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I know that all of the women in those bands would, bristle at that term of female-fronted bands, because, we don't talk about male-fronted bands.
No, yeah.
But I mean, for me, there are lots of criticisms leveled at Britpop, and lots of them are very definitely justified. There are a lack of, certain voices in the scene. But there were a lot of women who were front and center. And they were incredible writers, incredible performers. And in the book, there's a whole chapter that's dedicated to Echo Belly's story. There's a chapter that's dedicated to Sleeper. And there is also a chapter that's dedicated to that kind of rise of lad culture and Loaded, which came at the same point. And, it's funny when you think about Louise, there are two interviews that people can find online. One is when she was on TFI Friday with Chris Evans. During the kind of height of Britpop mania, and it is a very uncomfortable watch,
right?
I mean, it's basically sort of 10 minutes of Chris Evans hitting on Louise Wenner, and Louise does a great job of kind of batting it off. And then you fast forward sort of 20 years when Louise is now a published author, and she appears on a chat show with Ralph Little from the Royal Family,
right?
And he spends the first section of the interview alluding to, activities that he may have been involved in, involving posters of Louise in his bedroom wall, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you think, nothing's really changed changed, right? Nothing's
Mm.
really changed. And in Louise's book, she goes into quite a lot of detail about the kind of everyday nature of that sort of sexism. So I think the women in those bands did an incredible job of maintaining their dignity and of focusing on their art and the quality of their writing. But why it happened in the 90s like that, I don't know. I do wonder if it's the mod thing. I wonder,
Yeah.
you know, the 60s mod thing, you know, the mods had a real thing about Sandy Shaw, Cilla Black, Francois Hardy, you know, so it could be something to do with that. Or maybe, you know, society had just reached a point where we were kind of breaking down further barriers.
It was. I mean, that's the thing I found about it, is that the 90s, but the one thing about playing the whole of the kind of 90s on this show is that you realize that there are just so many. There isn't one dominant genre. You know, we have an R&B section. We talk about grunge at the beginning of the show. We have a whole section dedicated to hip hop. It's, you know, there are so many different areas that the 90s that you could be a fan of, and I think everyone kind of divided into their niches really, and I guess you're going to get cross blending across there as well. It's we could talk all day about this. In fact, I won't going to talk too much about it because I want everyone to read your book. Whereabouts will we be able to get the book from?
So you can pre-order it now everywhere. If you contact your local independent bookshop, they will be able to order a copy for you. I know that Waterstones are going to be stocking it. And people can also order the book from Pen and Sword. That's the publisher, Pen and Sword. And if they do that, they get a slight discount if they order before the 30th of June. I think about £4 off the cover price. And anyone who does that, if they find me at Mild Mannered Max on Twitter and send me, I don't know, a screenshot of their order form, I'll pop some goodies in the post, a postcard, a badge, I don't know, some sweeties, just something to say thank you.
It's like going back to the 90s. I was a member of the Dennis the Menace fan club. I think I got sweeties and a badge. It was quite nice. Mild Mannered Max. That's a place you want to be on Twitter. You want some mild mannered people on Twitter. We'll make sure that's obviously in all the socials this evening, Paul. And look, it's been great to talk to you. Now, you've introduced me to the Flamingos. Now, I think it's time to introduce the rest of the Rossendale Valley to the Flamingos.
Perfect.
Do you want to tell us about this track, Disappointed, and why?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, the Flamingos, Paul, we've touched on them already this evening. But this particular track, Disappointed, is, in my humble opinion, and what do I know, the greatest single of the Britpop era.
Wow.
I absolutely love it. It's got a reference to Exchange and Mark in the lyrics. Nothing could be more English than that. The front cover is beautiful. If people find it online, this photograph of two girls in the 1980s in a nightclub, the hair, the makeup is perfect. It's got a great melody. It's got woohoos. It's just a wonderful, wonderful single. And it very much defines my Britpop story.
Well, it's I'm certainly glad you've introduced me to it. We're going to introduce the rest of the Rossendale Valley to it and beyond now. Paul Laird, The Birth and Impact of Britpop, Misshapes, Scenesters and Insatiable Ones. You can go and get it now. Go and order it while we're listening to Disappointed from the Flamingos. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.